Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The atmosphere in the Quartermaine mansion was thick with tension, an almost palpable sense of unease lingering as the family gathered for the reading of Monica's will. The very mention of her passing was still too raw for most of them to handle, but they knew the day had come when all of Monica's final wishes would be put into words by the family lawyer. Drew, standing in the corner with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched, struggled to keep his emotions under control. Monica was more than just a mother figure to him. She had been a guiding light, a second chance at family when he had needed it the most. Now, with her gone, the prospect of hearing her final words both terrified and unsettled him. He kept telling himself he could endure it, that he owed it to her memory to stand tall and hear what she had to say, but beneath the surface, Drew's composure was already unraveling. The lawyer's voice cut through the silence, calm and deliberate, as he began to read the formalities of the will. The words were clinical, almost detached, but every sentence carried enormous weight for the family members seated in the room. Ned shifted uncomfortably in his chair, already anticipating conflicts over inheritance. Brooklyn folded her arms tightly, her eyes darting between relatives she barely trusted. Michael and Willow clasped hands for support, their silent unity in sharp contrast to the fractures already forming in the Quartermaine clan. Drew, however, could barely hear anything beyond the pounding in his ears. Every word reminded him that Monica was truly gone, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to face the truth of what she had left behind. When the lawyer turned the page and adjusted his glasses, the tension in the room spiked. He explained that Monica had written her will with painstaking detail, making provisions not just for the obvious heirs but also addressing personal relationships and unresolved matters within the family. Drew's stomach tightened as he heard Monica's words quoted directly. She spoke of her pride in her children and grandchildren, of her regrets about moments lost to conflict, and of her hopes that the family would finally find peace. Drew felt tears burning the back of his eyes, and though he tried to blink them away, he knew he was dangerously close to breaking down. Monica's words were filled with so much love, so much honesty, that it pierced through the armor he had built around himself. Then came the shock. The lawyer's voice grew heavier as he reached the section specifically naming Drew. Monica had left something extraordinary for him, something he never expected. It wasn't just an inheritance of wealth or property, it was a revelation, a responsibility, and a gift all wrapped into one. Her words acknowledged his struggles, the pain of his lost years, the sacrifices he had made, and the truth of his place within the Quartermaine family. As the lawyer spoke, Drew's knees weakened. He gripped the arm of a nearby chair to steady himself, but the world around him started to blur. Monica's voice, in her own writing, spoke directly to him as if she were standing in the room. She called him her son, not by blood but by choice and by heart, affirming that he was every bit as much a Quartermaine as any of the others. The moment those words were spoken, Drew's body reacted before his mind could catch up. His vision tunneled, his breath caught in his throat, and a cold sweat washed over him. The lawyer hadn't even finished reading the section when Drew's strength gave out. Gasps filled the room as he collapsed to the floor, unconscious, his body crumpling under the weight of the moment. Brooklyn let out a startled cry, Willow rushed forward instinctively, and Michael shouted for someone to call 911. The lawyer paused in shock, fumbling with his papers as though unsure whether to continue. For a split second, time seemed frozen as everyone processed what had just happened. But the Quartermaines were nothing if not dramatic, and within seconds the room erupted into chaos. Ned tried to take charge, barking orders for someone to fetch water and check Drew's pulse. Olivia knelt down beside him, her voice trembling as she urged him to wake up. Monica's absence had already left a hole in the family, and the thought of losing Drew too in such a shocking moment was unbearable. Brooklyn hovered nearby, her hands shaking as she tried to comfort Leo, who had witnessed the faint and was clearly frightened. The lawyer, realizing the gravity of the situation, closed the folder of Monica's will and stepped back, giving the family space to deal with the medical emergency unfolding before them. As Drew lay motionless on the floor, his mind spun in a haze. He wasn't fully conscious, but fragments of Monica's words echoed in his head. You are my son, you are my family, you carry my heart. It was as though she were reaching out to him from beyond, forcing him to confront not only the love she had given but also the responsibilities she had placed upon him. Somewhere deep inside, Drew's subconscious recognized the enormity of the gift Monica had left him, and the weight of it was almost too much to bear. His body had given in, but his soul was wrestling with the truth. The moments after Drew collapsed felt like hours, though in reality only seconds had passed. Olivia's voice broke through the chaos as she pleaded for Drew to open his eyes, her hands pressing lightly against his chest to confirm he was still breathing. Michael grabbed his phone and called for an ambulance, his voice urgent and clipped as he explained the situation. Willow leaned over Drew, trying to comfort both Michael and Brooklyn with a calmness that only barely masked her own fear. The Quartermaine mansion, usually filled with banter, arguments, and the sharp wit Monica herself had embodied, was now reduced to frantic whispers and a chilling silence broken only by the sound of Drew's shallow breaths. Ned, in typical Quartermaine fashion, tried to take control of the situation, though his anxiety made his words sound sharper than he intended. He barked at the lawyer to stop lingering and give them space, snapping that Monica's will could wait. The lawyer, unnerved but professional, quietly gathered his papers and retreated to a corner, clearly uncertain whether he should leave altogether. Meanwhile, Brooklyn clutched Leo tightly, whispering reassurances to him even as her own eyes filled with tears. She had seen plenty of drama in her family, but seeing Drew faint like this reminded her that life and death were never far away in Port Charles. As the minutes dragged on, Drew finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Olivia squeezed his hand as she whispered, "You scared us half to death." Drew tried to sit up, but Michael gently pushed him back, insisting he stay down until the paramedics arrived. Drew's mind was foggy, his thoughts jumbled, but the weight of Monica's words still hung heavy in his chest. He could hear echoes of her voice, almost as if she were speaking directly into his heart. "My son. My family. My legacy." The words rattled him so deeply that even in his half-conscious state, he couldn't shake the feeling that Monica's will carried more than just sentimental value, it carried a burden he wasn't sure he could bear. When the paramedics arrived, the family quickly stepped aside to give them room. Drew was checked over, and while his vitals were stable, the lead EMT strongly recommended taking him to General Hospital for observation. Drew, stubborn as ever, protested weakly, muttering that he didn't need a hospital bed when what he really needed was to finish hearing Monica's will. Ned immediately shot him down, insisting that Monica herself would want him to take care of his health first. Michael agreed, siding with the professionals, though Brooklyn muttered under her breath that with this family, the drama never quits, even with an ambulance in the driveway. Eventually, Drew was persuaded to let the paramedics transport him, though he made it clear he wanted the will reading postponed until he could be present. "I need to hear everything," he said with quiet determination, his eyes locking onto the lawyer. "Don't finish without me." The lawyer nodded respectfully, acknowledging the request, and promised to return once Drew was ready. As the stretcher carried him out of the mansion, the rest of the family stood in a mix of shock and uncertainty, each of them wondering just what Monica had written that could have shaken Drew so profoundly. On the way to the hospital, Drew's mind swirled with confusion. He couldn't ignore the intensity of his reaction. Monica's words had cut deeper than anything he could have anticipated. Her recognition of him as her son was something he had longed for in silence, something he never dared to demand, and hearing it spelled out so clearly had undone him completely. Yet there was something else nagging at him, a sense that Monica had left him with more than just emotional reassurance. The lawyer's tone had shifted just before he fainted, and Drew was convinced there was a revelation in those papers that would change everything, not only for him, but for the entire Quartermaine family. Back at the mansion, the mood was far from settled. Ned paced restlessly, clearly annoyed that the will reading had been interrupted. Olivia tried to calm him down, reminding him that Drew's health came first, but Ned couldn't help but feel the weight of unresolved business pressing down on him. Brooklyn, meanwhile, speculated aloud about what Monica could have possibly left to Drew that would cause such a dramatic reaction. "It's got to be more than money," she mused. "This is Monica we're talking about, she doesn't play by the usual rules." Michael, though visibly worried for Drew, quietly agreed. He suspected that Monica had left something deeply personal, perhaps even controversial, and that whatever it was would have ripple effects none of them could predict. At the hospital, Drew was examined and cleared of any major health crisis. The fainting spell was attributed to stress, exhaustion, and emotional shock, though the doctors recommended he take a few days to rest. Drew, however, had no intention of slowing down. As soon as he was able to stand, he demanded that the will reading resume. "I have to know," he told Michael, who had accompanied him. "Whatever Monica wanted us to hear, it can't wait." Michael reluctantly agreed, realizing that Drew wouldn't find peace until he heard every word. Arrangements were quickly made for the lawyer to come to the hospital and continue the reading, this time in the privacy of Drew's room. When the lawyer returned, the family gathered once again, this time in a cramped hospital space rather than the grand setting of the Quartermaine mansion. The air was no less tense, however, and in some ways, the change of environment made the occasion feel even heavier. Drew sat upright in the bed, his hands clenched tightly in his lap as though bracing for another blow. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and resumed where he had left off. His voice was calm, but the words that followed landed like bombs. Monica had not only left Drew her full acknowledgement as a son but had also entrusted him with something far more significant, guardianship over the Quartermaine family legacy. The room went deathly silent after the lawyer read Monica's words. Drew's heart pounded so loudly in his chest that it drowned out everything else for a moment. Guardianship of the Quartermaine legacy, those were the words that sent shivers through the room. The Quartermaines were not just any family in Port Charles, they were a dynasty, with wealth, power, and a reputation that carried as much baggage as it did prestige. Entrusting Drew with such responsibility was monumental, and it immediately raised questions that no one dared to voice aloud. Brooke Lynn was the first to break the silence, her voice laced with disbelief. "Guardianship? What does that even mean? Is she saying Drew is in charge of all of us?" Her words hung in the air, both incredulous and defensive. Ned's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the back of a chair. He had spent his entire life navigating the Quartermaine power struggles, constantly battling for a voice, and now Monica's will had seemingly handed the torch to Drew. The sting of that revelation was almost unbearable for him, though he tried to hide it under a thin layer of composure. The lawyer, sensing the tension, clarified what Monica had written. Mrs. Quartermaine expressed her wishes in no uncertain terms. While the estate and assets are divided among family members, she named Drew as the moral guardian of the family's legacy. In her words, he is to act as a unifying force, someone she trusted to carry forward not just the Quartermaine name but also its values, its resilience, its compassion, and its connection to the community. The lawyer paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. She made it clear that she believed Drew embodied the best of what this family could be. Drew sat frozen, his throat dry, unable to find words. He had never sought power, never hungered for control. Unlike Ned or even Michael at times, he had never been motivated by corporate maneuvering or the endless Quartermaine battles over ELQ. Yet here he was, handed a responsibility that could either save the family from itself or tear it apart even further. His mind reeled as he thought about Monica's faith in him. It was humbling, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. Ned couldn't stay silent any longer. "This is absurd," he snapped, his voice edged with frustration. "With all due respect to Monica, Drew hasn't been here long enough to carry this weight. I've been a Quartermaine my whole life. I've fought for this family, for ELQ, for everything we stand for. And now we're supposed to just accept that Drew, who's barely been part of this family for a fraction of the time, is suddenly the keeper of our legacy." His words cut through the air, sharp and bitter. Olivia immediately tried to calm him, laying a hand on his arm. "Ned, don't. This isn't about you. Monica made her choice, and she had her reasons." But Ned pulled away, his pride too bruised to hear reason. Brooke Lynn's eyes flickered between her father and Drew, clearly caught in the middle. She respected Drew and had grown to admire his quiet strength, but her loyalty to Ned made it impossible for her to ignore his pain. Michael, however, leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Ned, I get that this hurts. But Monica knew what she was doing. She saw something in Drew that maybe we all need to see." Drew finally found his voice, though it shook with emotion. "I didn't ask for this. I never wanted to be in the middle of Quartermaine battles. But if Monica trusted me with this, if she really believed in me, then I won't walk away from it. Not from her. Not from this family." His words were raw, vulnerable, and filled with sincerity. For a moment, even Ned couldn't argue. Drew wasn't claiming power, he was accepting responsibility out of love for Monica. And that truth carried a weight no amount of corporate experience could match. The lawyer continued, explaining smaller details of the will, but it was clear that nothing else could overshadow what had just been revealed. Drew's role as guardian of the Quartermaine legacy was the centerpiece of Monica's final wishes, and it was a role that would undoubtedly change the family dynamic forever. Willow squeezed Michael's hand tighter, sensing that this was only the beginning of a storm. Brooke Lynn's mind raced with questions about what this meant for ELQ. And Ned, though outwardly silent now, was seething inside, already planning how he might contest or undermine Monica's decision. Later that night, when the lawyer had left and the family had dispersed, Drew sat alone in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of Monica's words pressed down on him like a physical force. He thought about his lost years, the time he had been robbed of with his daughter, the pain of his captivity, and how Monica had always treated him with compassion when others weren't sure how to welcome him back. She had believed in him when he barely believed in himself. And now, even in death, she was challenging him to rise to something greater. Drew felt both honored and crushed under the responsibility, wondering if he had the strength to live up to her vision. The oak-paneled room at the Quartermaine mansion was heavy with tension, the kind that clung to the air like damp fog. The family had gathered, a rare assembly of egos and grudges, all summoned by the reading of Monica Quartermaine's last will and testament. The lawyer, a wiry man named Harold Grayson, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his briefcase open, papers meticulously arranged. The family members sat in uneasy silence, Edward, the patriarch, tapping his cane impatiently, Lila, his gentle wife, clutching a handkerchief, their son Alan, distracted by his phone, and Drew, Monica's favored nephew, whose usual confidence seemed shaken, his blue eyes darting nervously. Harold cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "We are here to execute the final wishes of Monica Quartermaine, who, as you know, passed away 2 weeks ago. Her will is unconventional, to say the least." The room stirred. Edward snorted, Lila patted his hand, and Alan looked up, suddenly attentive. Drew leaned forward, his jaw tight. Monica had been the heart of the Quartermaine dynasty, a woman whose sharp mind and sharper tongue had held the family together through scandals, betrayals, and corporate wars. Her death from a sudden heart attack had left them reeling, and now, her will promised to unravel secrets none of them were prepared for. Harold began reading, his voice steady but deliberate, as if bracing for impact. "To my husband, Edward," Harold read, "I leave my collection of antique jewelry, with the hope that you'll remember the love we built, not the fights we had." Edward's face softened, a rare crack in his gruff exterior. Lila squeezed his hand, her eyes misty. "To my son, Alan, I leave my shares in Quartermaine Enterprises, provided you step down as CEO within 6 months. You've chased power too long, darling. It's time to find peace." Alan's face reddened, his phone clattering to the table. "Step down," he sputtered. "She can't do this." Harold raised a hand, silencing him, and continued. The bequests grew stranger, a trust fund for a distant cousin no one had heard of, a donation to a mysterious charity called Aurora's Light, and a cryptic instruction to preserve the greenhouse, for it holds my heart. Whispers rippled through the room. The greenhouse? Monica's pet project, filled with rare orchids, had always seemed a private obsession, not a family secret. Then Harold reached the final clause. "To my nephew, Drew Quartermaine, I leave the entirety of my personal estate, my home, my private accounts, and the contents of my safe deposit box, to be opened only by him, in private, within 24 hours of this reading." A collective gasp. Drew's personal estate was worth millions, far outstripping the other bequests. Edward's cane stopped tapping. Alan's eyes narrowed. Lila's handkerchief froze mid-dab. "Drew?" Alan said, his voice low and venomous. "Why him?" Drew, pale and wide-eyed, shook his head. I had no idea." His voice cracked, betraying his shock. Harold handed him a sealed envelope. "This is for you, Drew." Monica's instructions were clear. "Open it alone." The room erupted. Alan stood, slamming his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. Monica's lost her mind." Edward growled about favoritism while Lila tried to calm them, her voice drowned out by the chaos. Drew clutched the envelope, his hands trembling. He stood, swaying slightly, and excused himself, mumbling about needing air. The family barely noticed, too consumed by their outrage. In the hallway, Drew leaned against the wall, the envelope burning in his hand. Monica had always been his confidant, the one who saw potential in him when others dismissed him as the spare quartermain. But this? This felt like a burden, not a gift. He stumbled toward the library, his vision blurring. As he reached for the door, his knees buckled, and he collapsed, the envelope slipping from his grasp. Hours later, Drew woke in the guest room, a doctor at his side. "You fainted," the doctor said. "Stress, likely. You need rest." Drew nodded, his mind racing. The envelope lay on the bedside table, unopened. He waited until the doctor left, then tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Monica's elegant handwriting and a small key taped to the bottom. "Drew," the letter began, "if you're reading this, you've survived the vultures. The safe deposit box holds the truth about Aurora's light. It's not a charity, it's a legacy. Open it, but beware, the truth will change everything. Forgive me for the weight I've placed on you. You're the only one I trust." Drew's heart pounded. Aurora's light? He vaguely recalled Monica mentioning it years ago, a project she'd kept vague, almost secretive. The key felt heavy, its purpose unclear but ominous. He tucked the letter and key into his pocket, determined to follow Monica's instructions, but fear gnawed at him. What truth could be so explosive it required such secrecy? The next morning, Drew drove to the bank, the key burning a hole in his pocket. The safe deposit box was small, unassuming, but when he opened it, his breath caught. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a stack of letters, and a USB drive labeled Aurora. He took them to a private office, locking the door behind him. The journal detailed Monica's discovery of a hidden trust fund, established decades ago by her late brother, Quentin. It wasn't just money, it was tied to a network of investments in a shadowy biotech firm, Aurora's Light, which had been developing experimental treatments under the radar. The letters revealed Monica's attempts to shut it down, citing ethical violations, but she'd been stonewalled by powerful investors, including members of her own family. The USB drive was the final blow. It contained a video of Monica, recorded weeks before her death. "Drew," she said, her voice steady but urgent, "Aurora's Light isn't just a company. It's a conspiracy. They're experimenting on people, and Edward, he's known all along." The video cut off abruptly. Drew's hands shook as he processed her words. Edward? His own grandfather? Sleep didn't come easily for Drew that night. Even with the steady hum of machines in the hospital room and the dim light flickering from the hallway, his mind refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Monica's words again, her voice in the lawyer's calm reading, affirming him as her son, charging him with guardianship of the family legacy. He turned restlessly, replaying the reactions of everyone in the room. Ned's outrage, Brooklyn's shock, Michael's support, it all blended into a storm of doubt that left him restless and unsettled. Meanwhile, back at the Quartermain mansion, the house was far from peaceful. Ned paced in his study, Olivia watching him with growing concern. "You're working yourself into a frenzy," she told him gently. "This isn't healthy." Ned, however, wasn't ready to let go of his anger. "Do you understand what this means, Liv? My own mother-in-law didn't trust me to carry the Quartermain legacy. She gave it to Drew. Drew, who's been back in this family for 5 minutes compared to me. What does that say about me? About everything I've sacrificed?" Olivia tried to reassure him, pointing out that Monica may have wanted someone neutral, someone who wouldn't let corporate ambition blind him to the family's deeper values. But Ned, prideful and hurt, couldn't see it that way. To him, this wasn't just about Monica's wishes, it was a humiliation he couldn't ignore. Brooklyn, on the other hand, retreated to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. She typed out a message to Chase about the chaos of the day but deleted it before hitting send. For once, even her sharp wit couldn't make sense of what had happened. She respected Drew, maybe even admired his quiet strength, but her loyalty to her father left her conflicted. She knew Monica's decision would haunt Ned, and that weighed heavily on her heart. She wished she could believe this would bring the family closer together, but experience told her it would only deepen the divides. At the hospital, Michael sat beside Drew, refusing to leave his side. The bond between them wasn't perfect, but Michael saw how deeply Monica's words had shaken his uncle. "You don't have to do this alone," Michael said quietly. "Monica wanted you to be the guardian, but that doesn't mean you have to carry it all by yourself. We'll stand with you." Drew gave a faint smile, grateful but unconvinced. "It feels like she's asking me to hold this family together, Michael. Do you know how impossible that sounds? The Quartermaines, we don't do unity. We do conflict, we do drama, we do chaos. How am I supposed to change that?" Michael leaned forward, his voice steady. "Because Monica believed you could. And if she saw that in you, then you have to try." The following morning, word of Monica's will spread quickly throughout Port Charles. Gossip traveled fast, and by the time Drew was discharged from the hospital, the entire town seemed to know that he had been named the guardian of the Quartermaine legacy. At the Metro Court, whispers rippled through the crowd as Drew walked in with Michael, his presence drawing stares and speculation. Carly spotted him from across the room and immediately approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and pride. "I heard the news," she said, her voice warm. "Monica was a smart woman. She saw the best in people, and she clearly saw it in you." Drew gave a modest shrug, though inside he was still wrestling with the enormity of it all. "I'm not sure I deserve it," he admitted. Carly shook her head. "Don't do that. Don't second-guess her. You've been through hell and back, and you've come out stronger. That's what Monica saw. And that's what this family needs." But not everyone in Port Charles was so supportive. Valentine Cassadine, always attuned to shifts in power, smirked when he overheard the news. Over a glass of brandy, he mused to Martin that Drew's new role could create cracks in the Quartermaine foundation that might be ripe for exploitation. "Guardianship of the family legacy," he said, savoring the words. "That's not just sentimental, it's leverage. And leverage, my friend, is everything." Martin chuckled, warning him that Drew wasn't the kind of man to play dirty games, but Valentine only smiled wider. "Everyone has a breaking point." Back at the mansion, the tension only grew thicker. The family gathered again, this time without the lawyer, and the atmosphere was electric with unspoken conflict. Ned sat stiffly, his arms folded, while Olivia tried to keep the peace. Brooke Lynn lingered on the edge of the conversation, watching nervously. Michael stood by Drew, silently backing him up, while others like Tracy, ever sharp and calculating, seemed to be weighing their own opinions carefully. It was Tracy who finally spoke, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Monica wasn't a fool. She knew exactly what she was doing. But let's be clear, being named guardian doesn't mean Drew is suddenly in charge of ELQ. That's a battlefield of its own." Her words brought a wave of relief to Ned, though only briefly. Drew nodded, acknowledging the truth. "I don't want ELQ. That's not what this is about. Monica wanted me to protect the heart of this family, not its boardroom." But Tracy's sharp gaze lingered on him, as though testing whether he truly understood the storm he was about to walk into. "The thing about this family," she said dryly, "is that the heart and the boardroom are never as separate as you think." Drew absorbed her warning in silence, feeling the enormity of his task growing heavier with every passing hour. He knew Monica had seen something in him, some spark of hope that he could bring out the best in the Quartermaines. But as he looked around the room, at Ned's simmering resentment, at Brooke Lynn's conflicted loyalty, at Tracy's calculating stare, he couldn't help but wonder if Monica had asked too much of him.